welcome to my One Piece video, where I will break down whether Zoro or Sanji should fight Saint Ethanbaron V Nusjuro during the final saga. As of chapter 1117, both Zoro and Sanji have clashed with Saint Ethan during the Egghead arc. This is already fairly noteworthy, since Ethan is so far the only Gorosei along with Mars who hasn't fought with Luffy during the arc. The fact that Ethan has already been pitted against Luffy's two top guys instead of Luffy himself could be foreshadowing that either Zoro or Sanji will end up having a full fight with him in the future. As the Gorosei are seemingly Imu's greatest followers, it is not at all unlikely that they will serve as the final fights for the crew while Luffy takes on Imu himself. If paneling is also any indication, Ethan could also well be one of the strongest, if not the strongest elder, as he repeatedly gets the standout visual moments amongst the five. If he is indeed the strongest or even the second strongest of Imu's subordinates, him fighting either Luffy's number 2 or number 3 guy could make sense, as this is generally how the Straw Hats fights churn out in the bigger arcs. Without wasting any more time, the video will analyze everything we know about Ethan from the Egghead arc and beyond, determine how it connects to Zoro and Sanji's characters, and whether he should fight either the combatant or the cook of the Straw Hat crew. The matchup we'll start with will be Zoro versus Ethan. The obvious argument for Zoro fighting Saint Ethan is that the latter appears to be a swordsman. Unlike someone like King who only occasionally used his sword, Ethan seems to be more of a genuine swordsman like Zoro. Every time we've now seen him fight, Ethan has used his sword. Not only this, but Ethan's sword is also seemingly very dear to him, as he's always seen having it with him even outside combat. There are even scenes in the manga where Ethan is seen maintaining his sword in the middle of the elders' meetings. Naturally, all of this would be very important for him being Zoro's potential opponent. All the way from East Blue up to Wano, most of Zoro's opponents throughout the series have been characters who've used blades. Wouldn't this then make it almost a certainty that Zoro, not Sanji, will be the one who will fight Ethan? Not necessarily. In the case of Ethan, him being a swordsman may actually make it less likely that he will be Zoro's final opponent. The reason for this is quite simple. Zoro should have already defeated Mihawk and become the world's strongest swordsman by the climax of the story. While I'm aware that there are alternate ways Zoro achieving his dream could happen, such as him fighting Mihawk after the government has been taken down, or there actually being a swordsman out there stronger than Mihawk, for the purposes of this video, let's assume that Zoro already is the world's strongest swordsman by the time the Straw Hats have their final fight with the world government. If this were the case, Zoro fighting any other swordsman in the climax of the series would be rather redundant, as Zoro should already be stronger than them. Not only this, but Zoro already managed to push Ethan back when they clashed with their swords in chapter 1117. If Ethan was significantly stronger than Zoro, it's hard to believe that this would have happened. If Zoro is already able to do something like this to Ethan on Egghead, it could well be that he will be too strong of a swordsman for the Gorosei to handle by the end of the story. To make an argument for Ethan, it is hypothetically possible that he is similar to someone like Big Mom, where he would have several ways of fighting beyond swordsmanship, and that this would make him overall stronger than even someone like Mihawk. There is, however, a far simpler solution to this problem, one that would allow Zoro to have his fight with Ethan without it requiring the latter to be stronger than Mihawk. Simply put, Zoro could actually fight Ethan before he fights Mihawk and before the Straw Hats' final face-off with the government. As of the Egghead arc, the Gorosei, after spending the whole story in the Holy Land, have finally gone out and are taking direct part in world affairs. They are likely also not just going to stop at Egghead Island. Now that Vegapunk has revealed how evil the government is to the entire world, the Gorosei arguably have no reason to remain hidden. While some of them could still handle the ruling of the world from Marie choice, others could set out and go on missions to take down Imu's enemies around the planet. Another reason why they could end up doing this is because of the Seraphim. The 5 elders are at the very top of the Pacifist authority ranking, which means that their presence could be required on important government missions where the Seraphim are deployed. This is even more so after the Egghead arc, where the Vegapunks and Sentomaru, who are also high in the authority ranking, have now turned on the government. One additional reason why the Gorosei might need to start getting more personally involved in the world is that Vegapunk's message may cause the government to have a sudden loss of manpower. I went over this more thoroughly in my Marine Rebellion video, but it's possible that Vegapunk's message will cause the entirety of the navy to defect from the world government. If the Gorosei were to start going out in the world, one of their biggest targets would undoubtedly be the Straw Hat Pirates. Despite being a top priority crew by themselves, the Straw Hats after the Egghead arc could also be bringing aboard other very dangerous people. At the moment, it looks like at least some of the Vegapunks are going to be escaping from Egghead along with the Straw Hats. These could even include Stella himself, who might still survive, considering how much punishment characters in One Piece have been known to live through. Perhaps even more important than Stella, however, is Bonnie, whose authority over the Pacifista supersedes that of even the 5 elders. characters. Because of all of these reasons, the Gorosei may well hound after the Straw Hats in the New World even before the final arc. This is where Ethan's fight with Zoro could potentially take place. I don't particularly have much idea on where exactly the fight could happen, however. It's not impossible for Ethan to follow the Straw Hats to Elbaf and fight Zoro there, though I personally have a bit of a hard time picturing it. Granted, Ethan wouldn't be the first One Piece villain to play a role in 2 consecutive arcs. Regardless of where the fight would happen though, Zoro fighting Ethan happening before his fight with Mihawk and before the story's climax could actually be a very important stepping stone for Zoro's character. As we're already in the final saga, Zoro's quickly running out of time before his eventual duel with Mihawk. Yet, Zoro still appears to be way below him in terms of power. Zoro's best wins at the moment appear to be against characters who are on the level of top Yonko subordinates, while Mihawk himself could well be a character on the level of the Yonko themselves. As demonstrated by characters like Kaido, Big Mom and Shanks, the gap between these 2 caliber of characters is pretty massive. While the plot could make Zoro many times stronger without him fighting anyone, like it did to someone like Trafalgar Law during Wano, this would be a particularly hard pill to swallow. As Zoro has essentially spent his entire life preparing to fight Mihawk, it could feel rather unearned if most of his growth happened off-page without any visible effort. If Zoro were to beat someone as strong as Ethan before Mihawk though, it would be a whole other story. As brought up before, Zoro and Eke had already clashed somewhat equally with Ethan when he was trying to destroy the Sunny, meaning that the 2 may not currently be insanely far apart in strength. Ethan could serve as a pretty suitable opponent for Zoro in the New World, one who'd give him a tough enough fight that would make Zoro finally grow to the point where he'd be able to face Mihawk. A fight with him could actually be a great way to improve Zoro's Conqueror's Haki, which he only awakened during Wano. As most of the Gorosei have displayed Conqueror's Haki, Ethan may well also have said ability. For reference, the only time Zoro ever fought other Conqueror's users in the story was against Kaido and Big Mom on the Onigashima rooftop, and Zoro only got to be on the rooftop for a few chapters before having to leave. As seen during, for example, Luffy's fight with Katakuri, fighting a strong Haki user can significantly improve one's own Haki. This could mean that just like what happened between Luffy and Katakuri, Zoro fighting someone like Ethan could well nurture his Conqueror's Haki. Another reason why this fight could work is actually Ethan's weapon. When clashing with him, Zoro makes note that it's a Kitetsu. Because we've already encountered both the Sandai and Nidai Kitetsu blades, this basically confirms that Saint Ethan is in possession of the Shodai Kitetsu, which is a supreme great sword. Not only could this make a fight between Ethan and Zoro very interesting, as we've never seen a duel between 2 cursed swords, it could also provide a very natural way for Zoro to grow in strength. If Zoro were to beat Ethan, he could claim the Shodai Kitetsu as his own, finally getting his first supreme great sword in the series. As we saw on Thriller Bark, Zoro is certainly not above taking weapons from his beaten foes. This could also work as setup for Zoro being finally ready for Mihawk, where they'd both now be wielders of the same grade of swords. If you want to take it a step further, Zoro could also perhaps turn either the Wado Ichimonji or Enma or both into black blades during the Ethan fight. As a sword being turned into a black blade raises its rank, this would mean that Zoro could have 2 or 3 supreme great swords after the fight. In summary, the argument for Zoro fighting Saint Ethan is that if the fight happens sometime before the final arcs of the story, it could serve as a very good stepping stone for Zoro before his duel with Mihawk. It could not only level up Zoro's Haki, but Zoro claiming Ethan's Shodai Kitetsu as his own could make him stronger than any other fight in the prior story. Still, the big caveat to the story going like this is that, while it would be good for Zoro's character, it could come at the cost of Ethan's character. If the story's climax is indeed going to be Luffy taking down Imu and the world government, the Gorosei would arguably be the most fitting final opponents for the Straw Hats. While Imu has other fighters as well, such as the Seraphim or the God's Knights, they've only been introduced to the story near the very end, whereas the Gorosei have been built up since Jaya. At least for me, it's hard to figure out better fighters on Imu's side for the finale than the 5 elders, which means that one of them losing already before the final battle could be detrimental. And while Ethan could both lose to Zoro and still play a role in the final war, like what happened with previous antagonists like Page 1, this would significantly lower his presence as an enemy. This is where the video will segue to not Zoro, but Sanji actually being the character who will end up fighting Ethan, and the fight happening during the ultimate climax of the story. Before that though, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I've been pretty consistent with putting out new content lately, and if you've enjoyed this video, you might like my other stuff too. Getting to the topic of Sanji fighting Ethan in the future, just like Zoro, Sanji has also had his moment against him during the Egghead arc. Arguably, he also got the better of Ethan compared to Zoro, where Sanji actually did damage to him by kicking Ethan in the jaw. Still, just like with Zoro, Sanji is probably still quite a bit weaker than Ethan. If Sanji were to face off against Ethan when Luffy is finally ready to take the fight to Imu, he could well be Sanji's last fight in the entire story. This could actually be a bit surprising, because Sanji has arguably never had a full fight with a swordsman in the series. Most of Sanji's opponents, such as Kurobi, Bon Clay and Chabura, were actually unarmed martial artists, which Ethan most certainly isn't. On the off chance that Sanji fights someone who uses a sword such as Queen, even then the sword was only a smaller part of his opponent's arsenal and not their main weapon. In a twisted way, however, this could actually be why Ethan being Sanji's last fight could be so interesting. While Sanji rarely fights swordsmen, he still fought side by side with Zoro all the way since Arlong Park. And, despite what Sanji may claim, he's also very observant of Zoro, as seen by how well the two work together on the rare occasion when it happens. As Sanji's dynamic with Zoro is one of his defining characteristics in the story, him getting to fight a swordsman as his last fight would actually be something very fitting. In a way, it could be a final note to end his rivalry with Zoro, where Sanji would actually have to use the knowledge he's gained from Zoro, whom he ironically thinks is a complete idiot, to beat someone like Ethan. Likewise, if Zoro doesn't fight Ethan, he could perhaps fight another member of the Gorosei. As we still don't know their full fighting styles, it could be that one of the elders is actually a fighter like Sanji, where they mainly engage in combat using their legs. This way, both Zoro and Sanji's final opponents in the story could mirror one another, where they'd use everything they've learned from each other throughout the journey to win their last fights. Aside from this, as brought up before, Sanji vs Ethan could also be much better for Ethan's character and the story at large. To recap, if Sanji were to fight the swordsman of the five elders as his last opponent, Zoro could fight one of the other elders, diverting all the problems with there possibly being a stronger swordsman than Mihawk in the story. Ethan also being one of the final bosses of the entire franchise would also certainly increase his gravitas more than if he was beaten earlier. There could also be other reasons why Sanji vs Ethan would be more interesting than Zoro vs Ethan. One is that Sanji's family used to be a world government member, and even got to sit at the reverie. Because of this, Saint Ethan may well have some connection to Judge, and could even know something about Sanji's physiology that he himself hasn't realized. Granted, if there's a member of the Gorosei who would have this connection, it would probably be Saint Saturn, as he's the warrior god of science and defense. This however brings up my final idea for why Sanji vs Ethan could make for a good fight, which ties to Ethan's own title of warrior god of finance. This is a very random idea, but considering how absurd Sanji's fights often are, it could be that his final battle against one of the five elders will end up being at least a bit comical. Just to play with this idea, what if Nami heard that Ethan is the character in charge of the world government's finances? Even though it would be a battle with the fate of the entire world at stake, Nami's lust for money could overpower her, and she could command Sanji to make Ethan divulge where the Celestial Dragons are keeping their wealth. Naturally, Sanji would not hesitate to obey Nami's orders, and it could even boost his morale in a fight against Ethan. If this seems too absurd, Sanji's reasons for fighting Ethan being about Nami still wouldn't stop the fight from working dramatically. For example, Sanji also managed to have very dramatic moments when fighting against Queen, despite the fact that Queen was the designated clown of the Beast Pirates. These are really just what ideas I could come up with for either Zoro or Sanji fighting Saint Ethan. I was originally going to end the video actually talking about Momonosuke of all characters possibly fighting Ethan, but the video ended up becoming way longer than anticipated, and I'm at least trying to get it out this Friday. Still, if this topic does well, I could later do Ethan vs Momonosuke in a separate video. While still on the topic of the Straw Hats fighting the Gorosei, it's actually possible that Usopp will become really powerful in the final saga and end up fighting the five elders alongside Zoro and Sanji. Make sure to check out this video if you want to see how on earth this could actually happen in the story. Thanks for watching this video to the end.